Hugh Brian Burton Davy was born in London on Friday, the 13th of June 1930. His mother, Ivy, a deeply superstitious lady, was horrified, worrying that she had given birth to her son on this most dreaded date. She needn't have been concerned, because although Hugh's life was to be touched with tragedy, it was also to be a full and happy one, and he earned the love and respect of many through his mild manner and kindness. He was to be the gentlest of gentlemen. Perhaps a more poignant connection with that particular Friday the 13th was that it was the day Sir Henry Seagrave died, a few minutes after successfully breaking the world water speed record on Lake Windermere. For Hugh was born with a love of fast-moving motor vehicles, and he was not adverse to pushing the envelope, as anyone who knew him in his younger years will testify. Indeed, motor cars, fast and slow, were to play an important part of his life. Although Hugh grew up an only child, he had a large extended family. Up until the war, Hugh lived in Streatham and then Fulham. When the German bombs started falling, his father Ernest joined the Royal Air Force. Fortunately, one of his aunts had the good sense to buy a property in Cookham Dean, outside of London, and it was here that several of the family, including his close cousin Deirdre, spent most of the war years in an idyllic childhood. Once the war was over, the family moved back to London, and Hugh was educated at a manual school. He proved to be a strong athlete. He regularly rode for the school 8, competing in races on the Thames at Mortlake. He was obliged to spend a year in national service and was enlisted for a year with the RAF. He hated it. His greatest military achievement was his ability to recognise the make of any car approaching his squad by the sound of the engine only, naming it well before it came into view. His first love was cars, and luckily for him, the family had already had a presence in the trade. He worked for his uncle, J. Davy, in various capacities, and then as a showroom manager in one of his London branches. By all accounts, Hugh was a popular chap, but there was no doubt that, particularly in the post-war era, having access to a variety of shiny cars did his image no harm. He was enjoying life. He liked to tour the country and Europe with his friends. There is no record of what they got up to, but you suspect where Hugh was involved. It involved madcap humour. He enjoyed laughing, and when he really started laughing, it was infectious, and everyone in his presence would end up laughing too. After several minutes of this frivolity, those present might catch their breath long enough to question what they were laughing at, only to discover that they had no idea. Hugh enjoyed the most basic slapstick humour, but he was also tuned into the more surreal works of Jacques Tati, and would roll around on the floor when watching Laurel and Hardy. To be in Hugh's presence when he was in a whimsical mood was to feel like you were living in a Monsieur Houlet movie, and it was a fun experience. He met Lavender through Christian Science, and the two of them were married soon after. It was a marriage that was to last just shy of 60 years, and those years they were rarely apart. However, just months after the birth of his daughter Susan, Hugh experienced the tragedy of losing both his parents in a traffic accident in Spain. For an only child, this must have been doubly hard to bear. He leaned on Lavender's support, and they worked their way through it, and he was able to throw himself into fatherhood with his beautiful new daughter, Susan. It turned out that Hugh was a pretty good father, which was fortunate since he ended up with 6 children, 15 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Hugh and Lavender were a strong team, and they were to demonstrate their abilities as a working couple by buying and developing their own motor car business in Wickham, Hampshire. The garage was initially successful, but it was a demanding economy, and the business did not survive the recession that blighted the 70s. This was great for the Davy children because they got their fun-loving father back full time, and he still liked to drive fast. Hugh also became involved in the church, first in St Nicholas, Wickham, and then in All Saints, West Lavington. He joined the choir at both and became a church leader at West Lavington as a lay pastoral assistant and church warden for many years. Hugh stepped in to help people whenever they needed it. He was kind and considerate and had the patience of a saint. most of the time. He was also a somewhat reluctant member of the respective amateur dramatic societies. He would be the first to admit that he probably wasn't the most natural of actors, but this didn't put off Lavender, casting him in her productions. He was prone to forgetting his lines and missing walk-on cues. He gained a legendary status in Wickham. As one of the Sheriff of Nottingham's men, he was shooting an arrow off stage. The arrow struck the scenery with a resounding twang, accompanied to a backstage voice shouting, "Bullseye!" The audience found it hilarious. In the last years of his employment, you could find him in the woodyard pottering about, cutting logs and delivering firewood to the villagers. It was a job that would have been hard for someone half his age, but that somehow epitomised his selfless character as he provided warmth to the community. Hugh loved his dogs too. It was rare to find him at home without one of them in close proximity, especially at breakfast time, to share his toast and marmalade. The last few years of his life were hard for Hugh. A strong man all his life, he was now crippled with illness, but he never complained. Even when he lost the person who meant the most to him, he soldiered on. He kept smiling and laughing with the family to the end, and the family will keep smiling whenever they think of him. We love you, Dad.
In September when the grapes are fertile, Margarita picked the grapes with me. There are silver bells upon her fingers, all the little birds come out to see. Ah, belle Margarita, ah, beautiful to see. Les mains de ma petite Margarita picking grapes with me. Ting-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling. In October when they fill the wine press, Margarita tried the grapes with me. Margarita has the feet of angels, all the little boys come out to see. Ah, belle Margarita, so beautiful to see. Les pieds de ma petite Margarita trading grapes with me. Ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a, ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling-a. In December when the wind is blowing, when the snow is on the bloody sea, sunshine still is in the golden glasses. Margarita, drink the sun with me. Ah, belle Margarita, oh, beautiful to see. La boule ma petite Margarita, drink the wine with me. Ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a, ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding-a-ding. Margarita, bring the sun with me. Ma bella Margarita, oh, beautiful to see. La bouche ma petite Margarita, drink it up and oh, Margarita, drink it up avec moi.